Hey y'all, welcome back again to another episode of Healthy Design. We'll talk today continue talking about genetics and different SNPs. Today we'll talk about NOS3, which is nitric oxide synthase 3. I'm smiling right now because I've actually already recorded this, but I forgot to turn the microphone on. So it's a great video, but you couldn't hear anything. Oh well, let's try this one more time. So we've talked about nitric oxide before with the health of blood vessels. We did this during the insulin resistance series we went through. And so nitric oxide is primarily found in our endothelial cells, in our blood vessels, in our heart. It helps to dilate blood vessels, which can decrease blood pressure because we got a larger area for the fluid to move through rather than this real narrow tube. It also helps to prevent platelets from sticking together and forming blood clots. Can also help to promote healthy blood flow in the brain. The brain can actually use it, kind of send things out to the different cells in response to an infection. So it can kind of play a role there too, like with the immune system. One way, sorry, Stormy's been real playful, so if I keep looking, that's what I'm doing. One way to tell that you might possibly have a SNP with this NOS3 is if you get a mood change when you're exposed to different chemicals. If you do, that could be an interaction between that NOS3 SNP and your brain chemicals. And so then when you have that exposure to those chemicals, it leads to that change in mood. So that's just a little aside for you guys. But NOS3 is needed for our body to appropriately respond to chemical or environmental exposures. Those exposures can lead to oxidative stress, which then leads to free radicals. We don't want just free radicals floating around. As we mentioned, this is also produced when we're just having energy production in the mitochondria, but our body's got good ways of dealing with everything as long as it's functioning well. So it's not something we need to be too concerned about as long as everything else is going well. But a dirty NOS3 gene, that can mean that there's decreased nitric oxide that we kind of want for that health of our cardiovascular system. And it can mean there's increased superoxide, which is one of those free radicals. And NOS3 can also become uncoupled. All uncoupled means is basically it malfunctions. So it can become uncoupled if there is that severe oxidative stress. So basically, if there's so much oxidative stress going on that it overwhelms the system, it can uncouple NOS3. What that's going to mean, again, is it's not going to produce nitric oxide anymore, but it's actually going to produce superoxide. Most often, though, that uncoupling occurs when we're deficient in certain cofactors. One of those cofactors is arginine, which is an amino acid. The primary one, though, is BH4. So again, we need those things there to help NOS3 to produce nitric oxide and not produce superoxide. If that's not there, then we get that reverse. Now the NOS3 is going to produce superoxide that we don't want and not produce the nitric oxide that we do want. Folic acid may play a part in this too. We talked about folic acid with MTHFR. There are definitely some people with that MTHFR SNP that they just can't process folic acid, period. As we talked about, there seem to be some studies suggesting that maybe certain people with those SNPs still can process folic acid. I don't know about that. It probably is going to depend on the person. But when it comes to NOS3, folic acid will use NADPH, which is an electron donor in some of these chemical reactions going on for DNA regulation, energy production, different things like that. And NOS3 needs that NADPH. So if folic acid is using that up, there may not be enough left over for NOS3. That could lead to some problems. According to Dr. Ben Lynch, too, increased folic acid can actually decrease the BH4 levels, which, as we said, that could lead to uncoupling and no nitric oxide being produced, but superoxide being produced. I'm not positive that is the case. I did find some studies where they were saying like high dose folic acid could actually help to recycle BH2 to BH4. So in that case, the high dose folic acid could actually increase BH4. But it seems like most of the time when you look into this, folinic acid or methylfolate are better at increasing those BH4 levels. What I would just put in as my 2 cents, if you're listening to this and you have different health issues, odds are things aren't working optimally in the body in the first place. So it's probably better to get your, folinic acid, methylfolate food or supplement versus the folic acid, because even if your body can use the folic acid, it's got to go through a couple of steps to get it into a usable form, whereas those other forms are already usable by the body. So it just takes a little bit of load, a little bit of stress off the body. And again, you may not need to supplement with these. You may be able to get that through food, and those tend to be the forms you find in food. So, all right, there can be other interactions. Really isn't the word I want to use. So there can be other maybe interplay between NOS3 and other genes, or where they can kind of affect each other. Let's start with MTHFR. If it's not working well, we have one of those SNPs, we might have increased homocysteine levels. Increased homocysteine levels can lead to increased ADMA levels, and both ADMA and homocysteine are associated with cardiovascular risk and endothelial cell dysfunction, so not things that we want. But ADMA inhibits NOS3, so we definitely don't want that. GST and GPX, so glutathione. Glutathione, if we have decreased levels of it, it can mean we have decreased levels of BH4 too. Sorry, Stormy's, I think about to, no, she ran off. And so both BH4 and glutathione are antioxidants. And so there's some complex interactions between those two and how they can do different things. But, it could be that if we don't have glutathione from a dirty GST, dirty GPX gene, maybe BH4 is having to be used more to help kind of clear that up. And so then it's not left over for the NOS3 side of things. PEMT is one of the SNPs we haven't talked about yet. I think it might actually be next week, but it's involved with cell membranes. If we have poor cell membranes, then we're going to have increased inflammation. And that increased inflammation can actually still arginine, so then it's not left over for the NOS3, and then that's going to lead to increased superoxide production as we go down the line. And slow MAOA and COMT, we see kind of a similar thing here. Increased stress levels lead to decreased methylation, which leads to increased homocysteine levels and increased ADMA levels, and then that can lead to less NOS3, because we see where, again, the ADMA inhibits NOS3. So now we're not getting that nitric oxide production that we want. A fast MAOA will have increased hydrogen peroxide, which can lead to decreased BH4 levels. There was some studies where it seems to suggest that hydrogen peroxide can actually lead to increased BH4 levels. I'm not sure how often that happens, but there does seem to be at least a pathway where that can occur. But definitely if the levels get too much, or where the body's trying to deal with all this hydrogen peroxide, it can lead to decreased BH4 being used, again, probably from some of that glutathione, et cetera. But then, again, if we have that decreased BH4, we're going to have uncoupling of the NOS3 gene, which means we're going to have increased superoxide. So that kind of seems to be the main pattern that we're seeing. Something affects it, at least uncoupling, which leads to decreased nitric oxide and increased superoxide. And just a quick aside for people my age or older, I talked about the hydrogen peroxide and leading to gray hair, and I can't see that now without thinking of the Beastie Boy rhymes. I've got more rhymes than I got gray hairs, and that's a lot because I got my share. So I just had to put that out there. Hopefully us old people enjoyed that. You young people, go look up Beastie Boys. They have a lot of good music. It'd be worth your while to do it. All right, moving on. Key nutrients for NOS3. You probably get two of them. We talked a good bit about them, arginine and BH4. We also need calcium, iron, riboflavin, oxygen plays a key role because we got nitric oxide, so there's oxygen in there. Nitrates are another one that can be a key thing there because, again, nitric, we need the nitrates. So BH4 has certain nutrients that are key for it too. Probably guess, we talked about it, folate in some form. So again, I'd probably suggest folinic acid, methylfolate. Again, not necessarily suggesting getting these in supplement form, but just making sure you're eating some of your leafy green vegetables, increasing that amount, maybe all that you need for this. Magnesium and zinc are two other key nutrients for BH4. These are two minerals that can get depleted pretty easily in a lot of people. So not a bad idea to supplement with those. We talked about magnesium just a little bit, that it's involved in 200 plus different chemical reactions in the body. Zinc does a lot of different things too, plays a role in our immune system and things. So good thing to have for immune function as well. So we're about to wrap up on NOS3. So far, it kind of seems like, well, if I have this SNP, it doesn't lead to anything good. Everything leads to decreased nitric oxide and increased superoxide. And so it kind of makes it sound all bad. But again, as we've talked about with the body, there tends to be pros and cons on both sides. So one strength, if you do have this SNP and you have cancer, there's going to be decreased angiogenesis that occurs with that cancer. I think we talked about this before, but just in case, cancer cells, they want to survive. And so they basically use everything at their disposal to help them survive. One of the key things they'll do is angiogenesis. So what that means is the formation of new blood vessels. Genesis, formation, new, angio is blood vessels. And so what those cancer cells are trying to do, they're going to create new blood vessels that'll bring nutrients into them so that they can grow and divert those nutrients away from the normal healthy cells in our body. So if you do have this NOS3 SNP, then there's going to be a little bit less of that occurring. Not saying there will be none that occurs, but there will be less. And so, that actually is a positive. And again, with most things in the body, there's pros and cons both ways. That's why we want to be real careful about just supplementing with something, just like high doses of it, because a lot of times there could be upstream and downstream effects. That's the way, like different medications work and lead to side effects because they kind of cut things off here. And so then some of those products that would be produced further down that chemical pathway are not produced, but our body needs those for all these different things. And so that's why I want to be real careful about just kind of hitting something at one level, not seeing what's above it, not seeing what happens below it, and not kind of putting all that together. So anyway, that's enough today. That's all about NOS3. Hopefully this was a little bit entertaining for you guys. At least it should have been informative. Hopefully I nailed that. But I appreciate you guys watching. Please like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. And I will see you next time. And hopefully I'll remember to keep my mic on. Bye, guys.